The recording. All right. Welcome to session number 6. Um, we did the dreaded. We tackled the dreaded mixdown and pre-mastering problem last month, so we're all like squared away. Everyone knows how to mix down their tracks nowadays. But today we are going to talk about a not unimportant part of dance music, which is bass programming. We did a little while back, we did a session about drums, which I sort of separated in 3 main chapters during the session. We talked a little bit about drum fundamentals, a little bit about drum programming, and then a little bit about drum mixing, if you remember, a couple months ago. And I wanted to use that same sort of format to discuss bass. So we're going to do a little bit of a general conversation about bass. Then we're going to program some stuff, and then we're going to mix some stuff. I wanted to start with just like a quick explanation of sort of my fascination with bass, because I didn't really like discovered dance music and then started thinking about bass. It was more the other way around, where I was more interested in bass first, and then from there onwards sort of moved into electronic music. So for me, as a sort of young kid, way back in the olden days, I was listening to a lot of like indie bands and stuff from the top 40 and all that, and I was always kind of fascinated with the sort of tall, lanky figure on the side of the stage playing the bass. First, I don't know, maybe I identified with that tall, lanky figure. But for me, that was always like sort of the coolest guy in the band, And I want to show you a couple photos. One of the first sort of artists that I was really interested in was this guy, Mick Karn, who played in a band called Japan, which is kind of like an art pop band in the 1980s. The cool thing about Mick Karn, apart from his sort of androgynous look, kind of similar to people like David Bowie in that sort of era, but he was also someone that played fretless bass, which is a really interesting sort of sound that's kind of like very different from regular bass playing. And also a sound that was copied a lot by sort of bigger pop bands like Duran Duran and Paul Young and people like that. But Mick Karn is one of the originators of that sort of fretless bass sound. And if you look up the band Japan, you'll immediately recognize the kind of playing that he does. So he was kind of like one of my first sort of, like teen idols, I would say. That was quickly followed by this player, Tina Weymouth, who plays bass in the Talking Heads. Also one of my all-time favorite bands for sure. And Tina Weymouth is also famous for another band called Tom Tom Club, which is also very heavily hip-hop sampled band. And I really like her style as well, because she plays sort of like behind the beat a lot, which I'm going to play you a little example of in a minute. But also one of my sort of favorite bass players. When I was little, there was also a show on Dutch TV called Rock School, and every episode of Rock School they highlighted a different instrument, and on the bass episode they had this character, Bootsy Collins, who on the show explained what the funk was and how you can play the funk. And I think that clip is somewhere on YouTube, so if you ever look up Rock School Bootsy Collins, you'll find this really great clip. But also amazing artist. Also this guy who's kind of like underrated. This guy is called Brown Mark, and he's a member of the Revolution, which was a Prince's band, and obviously Prince sort of like pulls all the attention towards him, in his sort of music. But Brown Mark was like very important bass player in the Revolution. Later on, I sort of got interested more in like indie rock and that kind of stuff. And Kim Deal, who plays for the Pixies, was one of my favorite bass players. Also, major boy crush in the sort of high school days, obviously. Like smoking cigarettes, playing bass, like nothing better than that, you know. So Kim Deal was a big influence as well. And when I got into reggae, obviously Robbie from Sly and Robbie, pretty much responsible for every major bass line in reggae and dub music, I would say. And so also a very important influence. Like I said, I sort of rolled into electronic music via bass. And so much later, fast forward, the drum and bass days and early dubstep days, and I got sort of my first couple gigs abroad. And one of those gigs was in Leeds. And I played at a place called West Indian Centre, which is kind of like a community centre, and there was several sort of sound systems in every room. And I met this guy, DJ Earth Pipe, and he ran a sound system called Sweet Potato Sound System, and it was kind of like set up in this small venue. And it was really cool because I happened to be there like a little bit before the gig, and so I saw how everything was set up. But what I noticed as well was that it wasn't really about just having like a very loud kind of sound system, but there was kind of like a culture around it. Like he had his whole family with him, you know, all the people in the crew that sort of owned the sound system and built the sound system. They would have like food together, and everyone knew each other from all these different sound systems. And slowly but surely I got not just interested in, you know, the sound of bass, but also in the culture of bass, where there's like large groups of people that are just obsessed by finding like the right type of sound, and sort of have like a whole community around it. In the next room, so next to this sort of Sweet Potato sound system, which is kind of like small beans, was another one called Iratian Stepas, which was like a very large and famous sound system that I played on several times, and just an amazing sort of wall of sound. If you sort of stand in front of the speakers, your clothing would just move because of the vibration of the sound, more so than actually the sort of loudness in the ears. It was much more about a sort of like, you know, physical experience almost. So Iratian Stepas is a really amazing system. This is another photo of them. These are the guys that run it. Mark Iratian here with the bandana. And so, you know, slowly but surely I got interested, and also locally there was a few people that were interested in sound systems. One was called Jamaican Jukebox, which was a sound system that we sort of rented for our very first parties when we used to throw parties. And that later evolved into another sound system called Crack Free Sound System, which was very small in the beginning. This was sort of the only stack that they used to have. But now it's 3 of these or 4 of these almost. And Crack Free is always present at Dekmantel Festival and also at Draaimolen Festival in the Netherlands. They also do stuff at Milky Way, which is a big venue in Amsterdam. And so, if you see like clips from Dekmantel, from this venue called The Nest, you know, this like big room or this sort of big area in Dekmantel, that system is Crack Free sound system. It was born in Eindhoven. And so we got sort of interested in, not, like I said, not just the sort of sound of bass, but also in the culture of bass. And you get these kind of like concoctions of crazy sound systems. And so I've done like a few sort of sessions also about this culture of sound. I did one with Hugh Stevens from Cyanide Sound System, which I can send you as like a really nice sort of, you know, talk about sort of DIY sound system culture. There's also a couple good books, like this one, Sounds Like London, about sort of reggae sound systems, and as well as this one, which is kind of a famous one called Bass Mids Tops by Joe Muggs, which is like a collection of interviews with everyone in this sort of like bass culture. So that's kind of how I got fascinated by the sound of bass. I wanted to play you a couple little clips of stuff I was listening to at the time, as well as a little bit later on when sort of electronic music started to take over my life. Let me quickly set that up for you. And also just to have a listen at sort of like different uses of bass. So let me quickly pull that up. All right. First artist I mentioned was Tina Weymouth, who played for the Talking Heads as well as for this band called Tom Tom Club. And one of the tracks that I was really into was this one.
In papers, words in books, words on TV, words for books, words of comfort, words of peace, words to make the fighting cease, words to tell you what to do. Words are working hard for you. Eat your words, but don't go hungry. Words have always nearly hung me. Words of nuance, words of skill, and words of romance.
This track was called Wordy Rapping Hood by the Tom Tom Club, and you can sort of clearly hear in the bass playing how she sort of kind of like plays behind the beat, so all the notes feel like they are like sort of dragging behind the beat a little bit. There's also this clip of the Talking Heads, same bass player, and you can kind of hear how that sort of like creates this kind of sluggish, kind of funky feel.
I can't seem to face up to the facts. I'm tense and nervous and I can't relax. I can't sleep cause my bed's on fire. Don't touch me, I'm a real live wire. Psycho killer, qu'est-ce que c'est? Fa 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 fa. Better run, 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 run away.
And so that sort of playing behind the beat is really important, and something that's often forgotten when you listen to electronic music, where a lot of the stuff is sort of built on a grid, right? And so that sort of looseness usually gives the tracks a lot more sort of funk. Another really influential bass player was Raphael Saadiq. He played on loads and loads of records, but was also part of a band called Tony 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 from the 80s and the 90s. But he also played on D'Angelo's records, and I wanted to play you one of my favorite tracks called Lady. I was sort of I started paying attention to this track again when I saw a video of bass player Thundercat, who had like a sort of a video where his favorite 10 bass lines were discussed, and he said that his favorite bass line was this one. It's only 3 notes and super simple, but he said just the way it's played is so perfect that he considered it one of his favorite bass lines. So none of that sort of virtuoso stuff, but just very solid sort of a bass layer under the music. So I wanted to play you a little bit of that track. D'Angelo, rest in peace. So, like I said, one thing that's very important is that sort of, playing behind the beat to give this sort of human feel. And the other one I would say is simplicity, right? Like most good bass lines are very, very simple. Just a few notes that sort of like support the rest of the music rather than trying to do too much. Now you say, this is obviously in old funk music or whatever. But does that also count for electronic music? And I think you can say yes, it's also in electronic music. This is very important. And so to give you like a little example of how that sounds in, for example, house or techno, I'll play you the next track. Of course, a Detroit classic, Just Another Chance by Kevin Saunderson. And the story goes that, Kevin Saunderson's nickname was Reese. And for this track, what he did was he took like a little bass sample and sort of in the sample made a little loop out of it. And so you get this kind of like crazy sort of humming, growling type of sound. And then he sort of played like a new bass line with that, which is now called the Reese bass, which was then sampled and imitated by many, 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 many artists. Pretty much everyone in drum and bass has made a track that has a Reese bass in it. And so this became kind of like a standard sound for bass, and it was all due to this track. There's also a bunch of drum and bass tracks that sample the voice from this track and also the other like sort of sounds in there. But this was a definitely groundbreaking track for bass in electronic music. And in this case, you can hear that sort of very simple sort of supporting actor type of bass line. Sometimes bass in techno or in house is more rhythmic and has more to do with how sort of the feel of the track, the drive of the track is kind of like perpetuated by bass. And so I wanted to play you another Detroit track where bass is used in a completely different way, in a much more sort of rhythmic, stabby type of way rather than a melodic way that we heard in Just Another Chance. So this is by Random Noise Generation. It's called Instrument of Change. as you can hear, the bass line here is more like sub-bass pulses that are sort of sitting between the 4/4 kick drums, just to sort of give that more driving feeling, right? That sort of like, it feels more like a forward motion, something that feels faster than it actually is. And this is a technique that you hear a lot in electronic music, and especially in techno, where it's constantly about that sort of speed. What also happens is, if you would play bass lines on the grid and also on in the same position as where the drums are, you get this more sort of staticky feel. So instead of having the notes sit between the beats, if you have them on the beats, you get a more sort of like marching kind of feel to a track. And a very good example of that is a track called Energy Flash by Joey Beltram. Joey Beltram. As you can hear, hopefully, when you sort of place notes between the beats, you get that more sort of driving, supporting feel. But if you sort of place the notes on the beats or on the 4/4, you get a more sort of like staticky, marching type of sound, right? And this is something that we're going to be thinking about and sort of talking about a little bit in the next section, which is bass programming. So like I said, a few sort of things that you have to sort of watch out for when you're doing bass is that sort of playing behind the beat, to sort of give it that more human feel. You don't want to make things too complicated. We're not doing chords, we're not doing solos, we're just doing a supporting actor, which is also what makes bass, I think, so interesting. To just be able to do a lot of damage with only a few notes in the track. And then that idea of sort of placing it either between the beats or on the beats, so you get these different types of feels in the music, like something that feels like it's moving forward or something that's more static. Let me pull up a couple examples. So what I was trying to find when I was preparing the session was a good example of how to sort of use like a little template to sort of show you a few different techniques on how to program bass, and I found another old track that had some interesting bass, and so we can sort of do a few little things on there to sort of give you a bit of an idea of how I usually work. So I have a drum beat here, very, very simple sort of electro beat, and then we'll just sort of build like a few different bass lines on top, just to sort of give you an idea of the things that you can do. So the drum beat sounds like this. So pretty standard, kind of like electro beat, I would say, with loads of percussion happening, etc. So if you want to sort of think about what kind of bass line you want to build on a track like this, the first thing I sort of always usually think about is, do I want my track to be driving or do I want my track to have that sort of more marching, staticky kind of feel? Because that kind of informs in which direction you're going to sort of build your bass line. And the second thing I always think about is what kind of notes am I looking for? And a good clue as to sort of what notes you want for a bass line is to listen to some of the music that you've already made. And in this case, I just built like a little power chord with a couple with these notes just from some synth. And sort of I just played something just to have something of a sort of musicality going on the beat. And it sounds like this. And so by listening to the music in the track, you can usually find kind of like a main key that you work with, or at least 2 or 3 or 4 notes that can work on top of this particular chord, right? So in this case, the chord is like a C. And so these 4 notes, or 3, and then 1 octave lower, that is a good way to sort of start building a bass line. So what I usually do is I just take a sub signal, like a sine wave, and just sort of copy the notes onto a different channel, and then sort of just build like a little, simple bass line. In this case, I want that sort of driving feeling, and so I don't play any of the sort of bass notes on the grid. I just always place them sort of in between the beats. What I also often do, because bass is very hard to sort of tune when the frequencies are very low, is that usually I play the bass line maybe 1 or 2 octaves higher than it's actually going to be, because it makes it a lot easier to then have it in tune. So in this case, if I just play the chord and a little sine wave, it sounds like this. Sounds like shit now, but then if I turn the sine wave down an octave or 2, you'll see where the bottom of that track is going to sit. And so just based on the 4 notes that I had in that chord, you can very, very quickly build like a little bass line that sort of, that sits there. And what I'm usually sort of looking for is more the placement of the notes rather than which note it is, because it's very important to sort of first get the sort of rhythmical idea going in the bass, and then you can always change the notes later on or make variations or whatever. So in this case, I just have a like super simple sub bass. And that could suffice if that was what I was looking for. You can, of course, go a little bit deeper. In this case, I could take these notes and then maybe find an interesting soft synth that gives it like a little bit more texture. So you have a little bit more going on than just a sine wave. And in this case, I found like a little soft synth that I kind of like called SEM. This one, I think it's by G-Force or something. It's kind of like just analog thingy. And so I played the same notes, and it sounds like this. And obviously this is a little bit standard sounding, but you can quickly sort of change that and do a little bit of creative EQing and overdriving, to give it like a bit more texture. And just sort of quickly sort of customize the sound a little bit so it doesn't sound like it just comes straight out of the synth. But what's more interesting oftentimes with these sort of soft synths is that those sounds already have like a lot of frequency. And so usually with bass, the problem is that it inhabits both this sort of sub layer, you know, the very, very low frequency, as well as kind of a mid-range. And you can clearly hear that in this particular sound. See, there's like a mid-range and there is a lower range. And so the most obvious thing to do if you want full control over your bass is to separate those two layers from each other. Because then when you start mixing the track, you can sort of like alternate the sort of sub bass levels with the sort of mid-range levels. Another thing also is that sub bass always needs to be quite clean sounding, while the mid-range you can do a lot more sort of stuff to it, like add reverb or delays, or you can add more distortion to it, etc., etc. So if you sort of pull those two layers apart and use them on separate channels, you have more control over each layer, but you can also do more with it. So in this case, for example, if you would sort of separate those two, or that one sound, into two layers, you would have like a sub version, this one, and then a much sort of mid-rangier layer where you can add effects, like as you can see I had like reverb and some fuzz on it, etc. So then if you add them together, and now that they are separated in two channels, you can sort of alternate the volume a little bit easier as well. So for example, if the growl is too loud, you can sort of bring that back without losing the impact of the sub, etc. Right? So in this case, or the other way around. And so just by sort of alternating it and having those two channels to control your bass sound makes a world of difference. And so this is a really easy way to quickly create something that feels more like your style rather than just sort of straight out of the synth. And so I would always advise, you know, if you use soft synths, first of all, look for a soft synth that has a nice full sound, that has a lot of frequency to work with. And then, you know, you can sort of separate it out in 2 or even 3 channels if you want to have like another sort of like crusty top layer that does even more distortion or whatever. But it's really nice to sort of separate it out and sort of give you more control over the bass. Does that make sense? Yeah? Easy. Okay. So this is one way to sort of treat bass. So you take a preset or a sine wave, and you just go ham basically on the effects and sort of like change or separate out your sound so that you have more control. But obviously there are different ways of doing it. One other way that I usually like to do is where I just sort of make this more rhythmic techno-y type of bass line, where it's more about little bass pulses rather than notes, right? And so I built this one, for example, kind of more of a sort of houseier approach. So I'll play you the beat and the bass line, and you can have a listen. And so this is that more sort of rhythmic-y, sort of pulsy kind of sound that we listened to earlier with the random noise generation example. And like I said, you know, usually what I do is I just use 2 or 3 notes from another musical element in the track, like a chord or some other little ad lib or whatever, just to sort of filter out a few notes. And then once I have the notes, I can just quickly sort of just sort of build like a little bass line out of it. Another thing that I do often is, if I have like a major key or like a key that I use for the bass line, I just sort of alternate notes and sort of add 5 or 7 or diminish 5 or 7, because then you can sort of build these kind of variations that are almost always in key. So for example, in this case, I have this bass line. And then you build a variation on top where you, as you can see here and here, I just pull the notes down 5 and 7, and then you get like a little variation. but I can also pull them up like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so by doing just sort of adding the 5 or 7 or diminishing 5 or 7, you can create fun variations. Sometimes, you know, I just sort of have my keyboard and just sort of play a reggae bass line, you know, one of those sort of boom, 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 you know, something really, really dumb and simple. And then just sort of like delete a few notes to make it more rhythmic and to sort of leave a little bit more space and funk in the beat. Sometimes not. Sometimes I just keep it straight reggae. If you sort of listen to some of my older tracks and you would sort of solo just the bass lines, is literally just a reggae bass line and nothing else. But that's also a really fun way to just sort of get that sort of rhythmic pulse going, which is much more important oftentimes than what notes you actually play. This is another variation, also with some more subs. So it's literally the same notes, but then just sort of placed differently in the bar, and then you have something like this. And as you can see, nowhere are the sort of sub sounds on top of the beat. They're always kind of like sitting in between them so that they sort of like push against the next kick drum or the next snare, right? Okay, so two ways of doing it, right? First, you sort of filter some of the notes from the other music in the track and sort of take those 3-4 notes and sort of build like a little variation with it. You can also separate the channels so that you have more control over mid-range and sub, or you can build these kind of like more rhythmic, sort of stabby type of sounds that are not really you know, taking the forefront in the bass or in the track, but are just sort of like supporting the beat into that sort of driving motion, right? Okay, there is more, way more than this. Obviously, you know, if you want to sort of get a little bit more creative with bass, you could sort of maybe combine different sounds. Like so far we've just worked with one particular sound, but for example, you can combine a drop bass with a sort of reseer bass, or you can have like a section where you have more stabby sounds and then a longer sound. And so this is kind of where bass becomes a little bit more interesting. And so let's go and take a look at a few of those examples. In this case, I built like a little bass line that also has a drop sound. And so that sounds like this. See, and just by sort of adding that little drop bass sample, this one, oh sorry, this one. Just by sort of adding that to that rhythmic figure, gives you like a little bit more of a different nuance. And of course you can make that even more intricate by, for example, separating channels and then have like a more distorted version of that, etc., etc. So you can build all these different variations in the bass line. Another way is to sort of add just a big bass sound. I mean, there's multiple sample CDs with interesting bass sounds, usually all variations of that sort of Reese sound, and this is one that I found a while back. And this is the original bass line for this particular track that we were listening to. Oh. again, this is just one sample, but again, you can sort of separate it out into a sub channel as well as a mid-range channel. And I like the idea of sort of having these looped sort of bass sounds, because then rhythmically they sort of do interesting things when you play them higher or lower on the keyboard, right? So the sort of C is like this, and then higher. Just more evil the further down you go, obviously. And so you can also make like little variations with it. So that's what I did here. So I just copied the bass line over 2 channels and sort of treated each channel a little bit differently. One has the sort of mid-range, and the other one has a sort of more lower sound, where I sort of rolled off a lot of the mid-range. And so you see where it's kind of like screeching a little bit is where I add more reverb, so you get more sort of emphasis on that note. Like that, while the sort of big sub bass line does exactly the same. And so this is a very fun way to just sort of quickly get a little bit more definition on certain notes, right? I've tried a few like little different things. What I sometimes do is I bounce the audio of a bass line and then just quickly slice it into new notes, or sometimes reverse stuff, so you get things like this, which is basically the exact same thing we listened to except reversed. So if I play that with that sort of low note, you get something like this. So, the more you sort of fidget around with ideas and, just sort of very freely associating and sort of, switching channels, bouncing stuff, editing stuff, the more you sort of are removed from just the sort of standard preset bass sound, and the more you sort of personalize this stuff. And the great thing about bass is, because it's, harmonically so easy to usually program, you can quickly just bounce stuff and then sort of use that same sample for another track and sort of process it again, etc., etc. So very, very quickly you just turn into this sort of bass monster, where you have a nice folder of your own presets, rather than having to go to just a sample pack or whatever. So that's usually how I sort of start working on bass, and just sort of by bouncing and by sort of splitting channels, just sort of make it more intricate every single time. I did a little folder for you guys as well, because one of my sort of favorite bass synths that I always use, I don't know if I can show you, is this one, is the Moog Minotaur. Very, very simple, mono synth, but the sound is just beautiful and round and full, and has like the amazing sub. I have another one which is a Moog Sub Fatty, which is a bit more aggressive sounding synth, but also really, really fun to work with. And so I made a little sample pack for you guys with just some sort of standard notes from both synths, and just sort of ran them through a whole bunch of distortions and pedals and things like that, just to sort of give you a bit more grit to work with. And so I put that folder in the email, or in the invitation email, so you can download it and play some stuff with. I've already heard a few tracks. There's actually a few tracks that are on the 3024 mentoring compilations that used things from the sample pack, so it's nice to sort of see how that sort of becomes full circle. But yeah, that's just all like fun ways to sort of manipulate bass and to sort of come up with different variations. I wanted to just quickly sort of talk a little bit about mixing. We have done that already last month, but obviously, like I said, bass often inhabits these sort of like two fields in the frequency field. Like you have a very sub signal as well as this sort of mid-range signal, and it's often a little bit tough to mix them if you don't separate those channels. Generally, what I try to do is as soon as a bass sound dips below 200 hertz, I want to keep all my signal mono, and you get like a more sort of straightforward sound because of it. Also, when you play stuff in on a sound system, you want the bass to hit everywhere in the venue at the same time, and so mono is the way forward. And it's also a bit more controllable, especially if you also use effects on that signal. Whereas if it becomes stereo or you use reverb or delay or something, it becomes very cluttered and very hard to sort of make it sound tough and straightforward. So usually what I try to do is all the sub signal is just mono and quite dry. And then all the effects that I want to use are usually just on the mid-range and not on that sort of sub signal. And so the mid-range therefore also gives you way more sort of room for expression in the bass, where you can add like some reverb, some delay. I often use like fuzz pedals and wah pedals as well, which are really nice because they have like a nice resonance filter that sort of gives you that sort of growly sound. And also because of the parameters, you can easily control them or automate them. So that's an easy way to sort of do it. Yeah, that's usually sort of my tips for mixing is, you want to keep those things separate to make sure that, your bass is both tough and also your mid-range is also expressive, right? Maybe I can quickly show you what that looks like in here. Let me see. So on this particular bass sound, see, I keep the sub quite dry and then have the reverb only on those higher notes. In this case, I sort of quickly EQ'd this mid-range exaggeration here at 1K. I make a dip here at 100 because that's where the kick drum sits. So I want to sort of like remove a lot of frequency so my kick drum pushes through nicely. Yeah, like this. And you can really see like how these two things are separated, right? Like you have like this section here around 50-60 where the sub pushes through, and then the rest is literally just mid-range. In this case, to add a little bit more definition, I use this thing called Radiator, which is just like an amp that you can sort of send the signal through a little bit hot, and you get this more, sort of growly sound. And another one that I really like is this one. Is just like a filter. RX950 is basically an imitation of an S950 sampler, and so it has like a nice little filter that you can use. And it also has a mono button, so if you just use subs, then you can just set it to mono. So just another like little tool to just add a little bit more grit to the sound. So yeah, so that's kind of a very, very quick, short overview of how to sort of properly mix your bass sounds. Like I said, we also spent a little bit of time last month as well talking about bass. So if there's more stuff, then obviously you can always revert back to the session from last month. There's one question. Oh yeah, I didn't fully catch how to separate mid-range and sub-bass. You duplicate the channel and pitch one of them up an octave. You can do that. but doesn't necessarily have to be that way. What I usually do is just copy the channel, and then by EQing, you can separate the frequencies from each other. So on one of the channels, you just roll off all the sub bass, so you just have the mid range of the preset left. And on the other channel, you do basically the exact opposite. Maybe I can show you. Let me see. Yeah, it's like these two, right? Okay, so see, this is the one that has only the sub, and then this is the one that has only the mid-range, right? So you just sort of very simply just roll off anything that you don't need. And so by having these two, if you overlay them, you basically have the sound again, right? But this way you can sort of control all the mid-range and you can control all the sub. There is also a way to do it if you sort of pitch up the mid-range an octave, especially if you like distort the shit out of something, then you can sort of create like a nice little extra layer on top of that. So there's just loads and loads of interesting layers that you can add to the sound just for more texture, as long as you just keep that sub as clean as possible. I think that's really the takeaway of getting your bass to sound right. So okay. Let's see. Probably depends on the sounds you use. Sometimes sub will be a sine playing the same thing an octave or two lower. Yeah. Yeah, and that's another way to do it, is to have the sub bass just be a sine wave, very clean sine wave, and then as mid-range you can just use a different sample and distort it or do something interesting with it. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions?
I have a quick question, Martin.
Mm-hmm.
And for if you are doing the separation by EQing like that, is that like a pretty standard, I guess, cutoff slash roll off frequency? I think I saw it was like around 400 hertz, or does it, I mean, I'm sure it depends on the sound also, but like, is that kind of like a good starting point to separate the sub and the mids?
Well, first of all, it depends on the notes that you play, right? Because
Right.
especially in the sub, you can very clearly see the note that you play and what frequency it inhabits, right? So let me see. In this one, hold on. See, you can clearly see the sort of notes peaking here at like 60, 50, 40, right? So it depends a little bit on, for example, where the kick drum sits in the track. If you have like a quite high pitched kick drum that sits around like 200, then you don't need to roll off that aggressively. But if you have like a lower kick drum, like the one in my track, then maybe you want to sort of curve this a little bit more aggressively, just to make sure that you're not going to be interfering with the frequencies of the kick drum, right? But usually what I do is I try to sort of isolate it as well as I can. But if you do this a little bit too aggressively, then it feels kind of disjointed when you sort of add the other channel, which is the mid-range, right? So you want to kind of make sure that this curve here and this curve here kind of like overlap like that, so that if you would sort of have the two channels together, it feels like it's still one sound, right? And so that's kind of how I usually look at it. So usually I roll off the mid-range first, and then sort of try and like sort of connect the sub to it, if that makes sense. So, but like I said, I mean, it varies by track, and it also varies on what else is happening in the track. But this is like a kind of a good way to approach it. Like it needs to sort of like together still sound as one sound. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
I was gonna ask about whether you have any sort of tips about I guess filtering the kind of sounds that you put in the pack. A lot of them are nice, clean waves that you can do a lot of stuff with, especially with just filtering. But maybe there's other processes that you like to use to kind of creatively work with these kinds of sounds. Maybe there's something that you'd like to share about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think well, the sounds in the pack are all analog. So what I did was I just use a synth, and then I send in the synth quite hot into the mixer. So you get like a little bit of natural distortion, and that is actually also definition, right? Into the sound. I also use like a Moog drive pedal, where you can sort of like extend the saturation a little bit more. And I think in the pack you can definitely hear like the sort of more growly sounds are just that. I didn't use any sort of LFOs on it, but that's usually how you create more movement in it as well, right? So what you can do is, for example, just import one of those sounds, you play a bass line with it, and then you add like a slight LFO, so that sort of the volume levels kind of like change a little bit, and that sort of gives you more movement. So that's a good way to do it. Another thing that I do a lot is just sort of degrade the sound itself, especially the mid-range. So you can do that with stuff like that Radiator, for example. There's another one called Decapitator, also by Soundtoys, which is like an audio level destroyer, which also gives you like more grit, you know. And so this is just a very, very easy way to, create these more sort of like growly type bass lines. If you work with like more like sort of sub pulses, you know, in that sort of like rhythmic sense of the word, for example, for a techno track, I use another one called Bittersweet, which is just like an envelope exaggerator. So it just makes like these kind of punches a little bit more punchier, I guess, a bit more sort of like the attacks are a little bit louder, and so you get this more sort of rhythmic, percussive kind of sound. Maybe I can find. Let me see. Do I have that on here? Bittersweet is by. Here. Yeah, this one by Flux, and just super simple sort of envelope exaggerator. You can also set it to mono or stereo, so it's really easy to sort of control your bass sound. These are really good for either drums actually, but also for these sort of more punchier, sort of sub-stabby kind of bass lines that sort of like exaggerate the rhythm of the bass line, right? So these are like just really, really simple. I would never try to do too much to the bass line. Like often bass also gets buried under the rest of the music. And so I think, you know, to spend too much time on filtering or automating, you're maybe better off doing something else with your time and sort of making the rest of the track sound good. But I think just a little bit of definition and just making sure that you're hitting the right frequencies is more important than, just automating everything and making it too intricate, you know? So, yeah. Cool. Anything else? All good? Right, nice. Like I said, if you want to know more about the mixing side of things, then definitely also revisit the session before this, where I sort of talk about that a little bit. But to sort of recap, good to sort of realize that there is sort of these two different types of bass line. One is the more sort of rhythmically supportive one, and the other one is the more sort of overpowering melodic one. Very easy to sort of build a quick bass line is by just listening to the rest of the music, filtering 2, 3, 4 notes out of it, and then sort of setting that up as your bass line. And then with the 5/7 trick, up or down, you can quickly sort of build a few variations, and separate channels for more control. It gives you way more creativity when it comes to the mid-range side of things, where you can add more effects and sort of more definition, while you keep that sort of sub signal really nice and clean. Very important, like the bigger the sound system, the more important it is that your sine waves are super clean in the bottom end. And so that's just a really, really easy way to quickly sort of, optimize your bass lines. Yeah, go to more shows where they have big sound systems is sort of my advice. Hope you enjoyed it. Next up, next month we're going to be talking a little bit about something that's not necessarily technical. I have a new module that talks a little bit more about scene and community. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge group 24 and 23 together, so we can sort of do these sessions together. So you'll see some new faces as well. And we'll sort of discuss, life in your community, which is a whole different ball game, obviously. So I will invite you for that next month. I'll also start inviting you guys for work in progress sessions. So if you have new music, then you can bring the tracks to the sessions and we sort of discuss how to improve them. This is also with all the other groups, so you'll also hear a whole load of new music. These are by far the most popular sessions on the mentoring program, so if you're up for a marathon session of listening to new music, then by all means you're invited. So all of that is coming, and just watch your email and your Google Calendar, and I'll see you on the next one. Next week I have a special deeper dive with Wata Igarashi, which I'm very much looking forward to, who made an amazing new album on Deckmantle. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit, so I would love to see you on that one as well. Super cool guy to talk to as well, so that will definitely be fun. And so that's next week on Tuesday. So if you have that in the calendar, then I'll see you Tuesday. All right. In the meantime, if you need me, you know where to find me. And I wish you a nice rest of the evening and a great weekend. All right. Have a good one, guys. Bye.
Cheers. Have a good one.